Hello, this is Ken Ferrie with this week's Boots in the Field report. Got a short week here with Thanksgiving in the middle of it. Today for the podcast, going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to get a update from Matt Duesterhaus, our agronomist over in the western part of the state, works with Ursa Co-op over there. We're going to get a kind of some feedback from him as far as how this season went. And then we're also going to get a report from Isaac. He's the head of the research department here on how the plots went about in 2022, and maybe some snidbits on what they learned, what the surprises were. So we're talking with Matt Duesterhaus. Matt, what are you doing today?
Today we're actually on a parts run to get a sprayer part. We're trying to get some fall burn down on, but a lot of things going on. Anhydrous is kind of full swing on the downhill slide, and same way with fall burn down. So guys are trying to get wrapped up with everything. A little bit of tillage left to go, and things are kind of wrapping up nicely. It looks like we got a good week of weather here right around Thanksgiving to get things finished up.
And Hydrus around here has kind of pulled a halt with that cold weather, kind of locking things up for them. But guys hoping to get another swing at it. Or are you guys done with the ammonia, or are they going to have to swing at it a little bit more here in the next 10 days?
Yeah, we're still going pretty good. It's slow start in the mornings with the frost coming out. Some of the chiseled or worked ground can go a little bit sooner, but a couple warm days here, 50-degree days, and we'll get things rolling again pretty good.
Looking back at your harvest, Matt, kind of give us a rundown of how the year did finish out for you guys. I know you kind of have the Iowa or the Illinois side and the Missouri side as far as land goes there, but how did it finish up for you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest finish or the biggest impact this year was the dry August that we had. So obviously our corn was a little bit farther along in terms of grain fill and when that corn needed the moisture. So I would say for the most part, guys were happy that corn yields were meeting or exceeding what they expected based on some of that dry weather. We had tremendous sunlight and ET rates in August and into Thanksgiving or into September, and so that finished out our corn better than what a lot of guys thought it would. So we had a lot of fields, making field records for corn, and if they weren't a field or farm record, it was maybe top 2, 3, or 4 for those fields. So I think most guys are really happy with how the corn yields were this year. We had, a lot of that corn got planted in May when it was up in 5 and 6 days. We had decent moisture through June, and a really good shot of rain there about the first, second week of July to carry us through. And I think one thing that helps too with that dry August was the conditions that we got planted in and the early root development by not being too wet or compaction or pushing conditions. I think it really shows us what the potential is out there. We didn't have those root issues to deal with.
I know you guys had some wind earlier in the season. Did you deal much with down corn by the time fall run around, or did that straighten up pretty good and go through without a lot of trouble?
We had a wind event about, I think it was only 1 day different than the wind event last year. So there was some down corn out there. We had guys that were putting reels on and had to deal with some of that, especially out kind of in the eastern part of our Ursa Co-op territory around Camp Point. Seemed like they took the brunt of that wind. So, those guys fought the corn harvest kind of all the way to the finish. And there were some hybrids that stood better than others. Some fields and farms and scenarios that were better. And, I think everybody maybe had a little bit of down corn to deal with. But for the most part, when we got away from that Camp Point Golden area, the corn harvest went pretty smoothly.
So how about on the bean side, Matt? Did you see the yields you're expecting there, or were they different?
Yeah, so on the soybean side, I think they were a little bit more lackluster for our area this year. We've grown accustomed to a lot of 70 to 80 bushel soybean yields, and this year with the dry August, that definitely impacted, our seed size and our yield overall. So probably a lot closer to average for most guys on their bean yields, a lot of 60s, some tapping into the 70s and 80s, but a lot more staying in those 60s and even into the 50s. So um, can't complain about 60 bushel beans at $13-14 with less than an inch of rain in August. I think if we look at that all together, we got to be pretty satisfied with how the beans turned out with the rain that we had in August.
Yeah, I gotta kind of keep it in perspective as far as what some of these guys would have sold these fields for back in August when we just couldn't buy a rain.
Right. Yeah. And if you look, when you're comparing to your average, are you looking at your 10-year average or your 5-year average or your 3-year average? It really determines how close to average you are, because the last several years we have been producing pretty good beans. So we got to, like you said, keep that into perspective too.
Do you have any surprises when you finished up? I know you got plots over there for us, as well as farming there on your family ground and stuff, or even what's going on in the neighborhood. Were there any surprises that popped out in either crop, that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I'd say, one of the big surprises to me was probably with some of our fungicide plots. Um, Last year and other years, we've seen some really big visual differences, whether it's on soybeans or corn, in the treated versus the untreated. And this year, we've heard a lot and talked a lot about tar spot, trying to get our hands wrapped around this and figure out, how does early sprays, late sprays, 2 sprays of fungicide affect tar spot. We really didn't have tar spot come in until August, but we still had some plots out there looking at late applications into the R4, R5 time frame. And I really thought we might see more visual difference than what we did. And then even when we got to those plots with the combine, the yield and the moisture really wasn't showing up. And I think you guys kind of saw the same thing over at Hayworth, right, Ken?
Yeah, we were we're getting responses to the treatments, but it's going to be hard to pay for our late and our second treatments that we were throwing out there as we kind of dig through the data.
Yeah.
Unlike the plot that Jared took out for us up in Northeast Iowa, which was very visible up there, you could see it already back in August, and that plot was over 50 bushel response. So where the tar spot is where the response is. Um, and we, like you, a lot of fields actually didn't even show tar spot here in what was Tar Spot Alley last year. It didn't show the tar spot even out into the end of September, while other fields did, but quite a difference from year to year.
Yeah. And, the other thing I would say, even on the bean side, we've kind of got away from leaving a lot of checks on the soybean fungicide over here because we have seen good responses to it. But this year didn't seem like they stood out quite as much either. So part of that could have been, some disease pressure, but part of it probably was more just the weather in that dry August might have limited us, been the limiting factor for the bean yields, that the plant health didn't play so much of a role as it has in the past.
Right, where you may have got the stay green per se with the fungicide application, but didn't have the water to take advantage of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And probably the last surprise that I would say, and some guys aren't surprised, some guys are with it, but when we're combining these cornfields around timbers, the amount of wildlife damage when you get into a field and the end rows are only making 100, 120, 140 bushel because of the deer and the raccoons, and you're running out in the middle of the field 250, 260. A lot of guys are, will be interested in the plots that you did over there at Hayworth with the deer and coon repellent with that hot sauce product. So we'll be interested to look at those results.
Yeah, and I'm getting the same comments over here too from a lot of growers that this year, last year was ramped up enough, but the tar spot was hard to tell. But this year, definitely experiencing more wildlife pressure on these borders than what they're accustomed to. And again, part of that is probably the population in itself maybe growing as well. So, but yeah, I think we're going to have to start focusing on how we manage some of that differently, because it's building its own yield zones around the outer edge of that field when you're giving up half the crop to the wildlife.
Right. Yeah. But overall, I think we had a really good year over here in this territory. Good yields, good prices. So we definitely have to be thankful for that.
Yeah, there's no way around it. It's going to stack up to be a pretty good year for almost everybody. I think within our customer base, from good yields to even at average yields with these good prices, to help them, be able to lick some wounds from last year's tar spot issues and that type of thing, and to move forward to next year. So,
yeah, and we all know, us especially, we're dealing with soil testing and guys getting into fertilizer prices and stuff like that. And when we look at some of our data and the values, as we look at different farms that are at different soil test and fertility levels, you can really see how that can impact your yields in a year like this, where you got potential to go a little higher. So that's probably one thing to throw out there. And with the crop tech soil testing program, it really does a good job of keeping guys on track and keeping their fertility where it needs to be, so they can take advantage in a year like this.
yeah, be able to manage around it. I know with the dry weather this year, we saw a lot of soil tests float to the acid side, right? But part of that is natural acidity, and part of it is the fact that we were just that dry. So being able to look back at your history and say, well, this thing's moved further than we think as far as acidity goes, and you can then make a good judgment call on how much of that acidity you need to fix and how much will disappear as soon as we get the rain back into the picture and get some moisture back to it.
Yep.
How you doing on your testing? You pretty well wrapped up?
Yeah, we've got all the fall testing wrapped up over here on the URSA side. But if there is guys or any of the URSA co-op customers that are interested in our soil testing program, this winter is going to be a great time to sit down with guys, and we'll look at fields and taking orders and yield maps and building those yield zones, and really putting a lot of time and effort into getting those zones developed and those soil tests pulled to kind of keep you on track. So if anyone out there is interested in the URSA co-op area, you can get a hold of Michael Hicks or anybody at URSA co-op, get a hold of me, Matt Duesterhaus, and we can get you set up.
Sounds great. Appreciate you taking the time, Matt, to kind of give us a update on what's going on over there. You probably looking forward to the yield map season like we are in here, where we get to actually break down what actually happened, kind of a Monday morning quarterbacking to some extent. But the yield maps, reminding those guys to get their yield map data in so we can start the process of building those maps. So want to wish you and your family a good Thanksgiving over there, and keep it safe.
Yep, you too.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Isaac, for being able to take some time to give us some background on this year's plots. I know as of 2 weeks ago, or I guess 1 week ago, you finished up the harvest. You've been putting a lot of next year's plots in. Can you give the customers maybe a review of what this plot season was like, as far as what you're seeing out there in the plots scattered across the customer base?
Yeah, our plot season in general here was pretty smooth. We didn't, in this general area, we didn't have a lot of delays, not a lot of rain delays. So guys were able to get after it pretty steady. We haven't dove real deep into the results yet, but like anecdotally, I know here at Corn College, we could not find tar spot or a lot of disease in our fungicide plots. We eventually did get tar spot here as we were watching it, but it was quite a bit later in the season, similar to what it was 2 years ago when we saw it, not last year. And so that did temper our fungicide results, the advantage to the fungicide application. So we still saw an advantage to that single application, but not nearly as strong as some of our responses last year. However, at first glance, some of our results coming in from Northeast Iowa and fungicide application look really positive, but they got tar spot earlier in their growing season and had it running rampant, more similar to what we saw last year in that regard.
They had some of the same streaking issues up there that we had here last year as well with the aerial application, correct?
Yes, with the airplane application, with the drone application is as early as they got it, really similar to us last year, and how deep in the canopy we think that tar spot was when the application was made.
That's probably one of the things that came out of this year's plot work, is all the work your team did with litmus paper and realizing that when it comes to tar spot, we got to rethink our aerial applications a little bit, our nozzle selection, and how we go after that, especially if it's what we call the homegrown tar spot.
Yeah, the tar spot down in the canopy is problematic. The streaks that we saw this past year, even where the corn went down from our studies, wasn't because of necessarily a misapplication or improper rate making it to the outer edges of the swath. It seemed like his deposition in the canopy it was staying mostly in the upper half of the canopy, which on a typical year is exactly what we want, is the fungicide to stay in the top half, because that's what we're concerned with on a disease prevention side, because that top half's what fills the ear. But with tar spot, being somewhat parasitic in nature, tar spot on the lower leaves can cause a lot of havoc. And if we're not controlling the tar spot on the lower half of the plant, when it starts to run rampant, we're seeing some major issues. So those outer edges of the swath where it's not depositing deep enough into the canopy, if the pressure's high enough, we're starting to see those streaks.
And I think that's key with any disease, right? Wherever the pressure is, that will make different fungicides stand out, different actual timing and rates stand out. And when you don't have the pressure, you're not going to see it. Kind of what you're seeing in your trials this year is the yield differences aren't as big.
Absolutely. We had a lot of guys come at Corn College saying this year, after last year, saying, I went to a 2-spray program, or we went through a 3-spray program with our fungicides, and it's the cleanest corn that we've ever had. But we could walk over to some no-spray corn at Corn College that was the cleanest corn we'd ever had at that point too. So, when are the fungus coming in? What's the environment like is going to determine the pressure, and then where on the plant is it coming from? So is it blowing in and mostly at the top? Is it, coming off of last year's residue and working its way up the plant, and how bad does it get? All that's going to affect the rate of return, I guess, on the fungicide.
In your plot program this year, did you guys run across any big surprises out there that you weren't looking for?
I don't know if we had any real big surprises. We are getting into some of our sulfur work on different applications, different products, and I think some of that will be pretty interesting once we get it analyzed all the way out. Our early beans this year showed again that they're definite a yield boost. Getting them early, getting them planted early, especially into the beginning part of April, does create some issues, some fear of frost and emergence and stuff like that. But they were a very consistent yielder. And then on that early planting side, some of these new bean varieties that we're planting, that trying out this year, that they recommend at lower populations, is seeing some of these 40, 50,000 plant stands cranking out 80, 90 bushel bean yields was very impressive.
Yeah. Look kind of like Christmas trees when they got done, but man, did they have the beans on them.
A lot of branching. Now we'll have to figure out the weed control side and everything else going forward at those lower populations. But planting them early did help us get a little bit more growth on them, and I think do a little better job of canopying as well.
I know you guys have got a lot of data that you have to process. You got hundreds and hundreds of cart weights and stuff. What's the job right now? What are you guys working on? What are you and Jared doing to get this stuff ready for our winter meetings?
Yeah, so in our plot trials, every rep is weighed as we go across the field. So we want to see how a treatment performs across the field in different zones. So if we have a high fertility or low fertility zone, if we have a high elevation versus low elevation, different soil types. So we can kind of look at, well, it's a 5 bushel response on average, but it's really an 8 bushel response in these types of soils and a 2 bushel response in these types of soils. So that yield data becomes important, looking at those strips across the field and how a treatment responds. But then the yield weights also become pretty important. So right now we've weighed every single pass across the field. We're going into our yield mapping software, and we're scaling each individual pass up or down to match the actual load weight we got at the field at that time. And then we'll analyze it by zone to try to ground truth what's out there before we start carving it up, so to speak.
And I assume you have to put some interpretation in there too. If I know you guys take lots of notes when you're out there in the field, if a row is missing within one pass or something happened, maybe there's some wildlife damage, things like that. All those notes have to come back into the processing of that data right now as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're doing these plots in the real world, so you end up with sprayer tracks or something where somebody got off, and you mark where those are so we can cut them out of the data, or a planter skip, or somebody had to stop and start again, and rows running out or what have you. So any characteristics like that, we're gonna mark to be able to exclude them later, which is also why it's important that you want multiple weights, multiple replications. So if you have some that get taken out, your whole plot's not gone.
And that's where you can bring in your drone imagery and your aerial imagery from throughout the year to help you realize where those spots are at as well.
Yeah, a lot of them will know where they are before we get to harvest. Some of them may be new at harvest. Some of it's just wind damage or something like that, where a certain treatment goes down more than the other, and we have to change speeds or something to that nature, which can wreak havoc on the yield monitor sometimes, which is why we got to take those weights. And we're also on that regard, we're checking for harvest loss. So making sure we don't have a higher harvest loss in one treatment versus the other based on the hybrid or the moisture or the treatment that's out there.
Which is a big issue last year with our plots, trying to deal with the tar spot and the harvest loss that was affecting those numbers. So you kind of realized, a treatment may make a big difference one way or the other in the amount of harvest loss you're dealing with.
Absolutely. So some of those fields look like you seeded a cover crop after they got done, and that can put a big wrench in your data you're actually collecting.
A lot of the growers have some of their own plots out there that they're trying to keep track of everything from varieties to treatments and stuff. And what makes a good farmer plot can be something that one of our customers is actually doing. What do they need to think about to get a good trial that they can actually make decisions off of?
Yeah, so this time of year, you're going to see a lot of plot data, whether it's from seed companies, your neighbor, your own plot data, and kind of deciphering how much of that can you use, how much do you trust it, and what decisions you want to make off of it. There's no plot data like your own plot data to a certain extent. So we always encourage guys to put in their own plots, see it with their own eyes. We just want to make sure it's set up well enough that you can use the data coming off of it. So I think there's probably 3 main things. If you keep that in mind when you're putting in a plot or when you're analyzing or looking at the data afterwards, number one is trying to limit your variables. So you're not testing 2 or 3 things at one time. pare it down so there's not a huge amount of differences. So we don't want to compare the home farm versus the North 80 that's 3 miles away, even though you're looking at, say, 2 different hybrids. There's way too many variables in that situation that are going to feed into those yield differences. Even one half the field versus the other, you have a lot of variabilities on soil type. Even this year, it seemed like the rain one half of a farm receives versus the other. So limiting those variables, getting some of these treatments side by side so that you can see them in different parts of the field, but you're not making a huge stretch from one soil type to the other when you're looking at that data. So eliminating the variables is probably first and foremost. We like to have the weights is probably a big part of it. So even when we weigh every single pass within a plot, right now, guys taking out a hybrid plot, most guys wouldn't dream of taking a hybrid plot out without a weigh wagon. They're not going to just use yield monitor data, because how the monitor reads different hybrids differs, because kernel shape, kernel size, kernel density, test weight changes, moisture changes, and that can wreak havoc on the yield monitor accurately reading those results. So we like to have a scale cart there to verify what the yield monitor is telling us. Well, in our hand harvest stuff, where we're looking at hybrid flex, and is it flexing in rows around or length or kernel depth, you see that same kind of flex from hybrid to hybrid as you do from changes in population, changes in nitrogen, changes in fungicide. When you change especially when you change the kernel depth portion of that flex, you change the shape, size of that kernel, definitely the weight of that kernel. It can have huge implications on how well the yield monitor does at reading that data. So in a nitrogen plot, we may go from our high nitrogen rates where the yield monitor is overestimating by 2.5% to our low nitrogen stuff where it's underestimating by 2.5%. Now, overall, the yield monitor is calibrated. We're within 2.5% all the time. And if you took the total weights off that field and what you took to the elevator, it's going to look very accurate, but it's not precise. We're overestimating on one treatment, we're underestimating the other. When we start talking about over by 2% and under by 2%, we have a 4% difference there. All of a sudden, that's 10 bushel. That's enough to make a treatment pay its way or not. So all of a sudden, results you didn't think were worth the extra nitrogen all of a sudden become that, or vice versa. So the weights become pretty important. We still want the yield map data to look at it across the zones, but we want to verify each of those loads by weights, just because even a well-calibrated yield monitor, 2% in corn is huge if we're over by 2 and under by 2 when we're riding that line of trying to figure out what the ROI is. And then soybeans are the same way. Soybeans are so hard when, big differences in corn are 5 and 10 bushel, big differences in beans, maybe 2 or 3. Well, measuring a 2 or 3 bushel difference is a lot tougher in beans, in corn. So there's where the weights really come in as well.
So simplify your study, get it replicated across the farm, and then do whatever you can to get some actual weights on those strips.
Right. Replications become pretty important. So you'll see sometimes where they do two replications, and one shows no difference, but one shows a 5 bushel difference. And a lot of times when that happens, the farmer's going to look at it, and it's basically what he wants to believe. If he doesn't want it to make a difference, he's going to lean more towards the 0 bushel difference. If he wants it to make a difference, he's going to lean more towards the 5 bushel difference. Whereas the more replications you have out in that field, the better off you are at deciphering through it.
So we've got customers that, as they are now pouring their yield data in here for the team to get ready for their yield map meetings, every year we come across a lot of on-farm trials that guys were doing themselves. What would you say to those guys if they got plots out there and they're interested in having us look at those plots when we process their data, maybe even interested in sharing those plots with the rest of the customers? What advice you got for them?
Yeah, so definitely for our customers that are already sending in yield data, if you have plots in there, let us know about them, before we have your yield map meeting, and there's a chance we can do some of that analysis ahead of time and discuss the results with you at the consultation. But tell us where they are. If you can write out what you tested, what the treatments are, where they were in the field. If you separated the treatments into different loads on the monitor, that's even better. That makes it easier for us to find. If you have application data that shows, where they are, get that to us as well. And we can do some of that analysis ahead of time before we even have the yield map meeting. And we'll probably give us as much information you can on where the plots are and what they are. And when we go to work with your data, we'll probably give you a call to be able to work through it.
And this would be the same for whether it's data they want to keep in-house themselves, not willing to share, versus data that they're willing to share with the rest of the customer base.
Absolutely. We'll deal with plots both ways. So if it's stuff that you're willing to share with our customer base, we'll talk about those results and share them with everybody. And that happens quite a bit. If it's results that you're willing to share, but you don't necessarily want your name or location tied to them, we can make it anonymous data as well. And then we do a lot of analysis that just stays on farm. So if it's for your eyes only, something you're trying on your farm and you're not really interested in sharing it, we'll work with it through you so we can both learn on that data together.
And there's going to be a little bit of a I guess bar to entry, or whatever you want to call it, meaning that before we would take their data and use it in our customer meetings this winter and share with other people, along with them giving us permission, it's going to have to kind of pass mustard through you guys there at the research side before you'd use it.
Oh, absolutely. So we may get done analyzing your data and say, well, it shows a 0 bushel response here or 4 bushel response here. But we have concerns about the validity of the data because we didn't do, X, Y, Z, or it would have been better if we did this, this, and this. So it may be data that we share with you, but we're not necessarily going to share with the general public because maybe it doesn't meet that same standard that some of our other test plots are doing as well. But we'll let you know what concerns we have with it. But we usually don't like to share test plot data unless we have a I guess strong belief in the accuracy of that data.
Yeah.
Way to verify it.
Well, great. Well, I appreciate you taking time to kind of walk us through what the research side is working on right now, and we'll be excited to dig through all these numbers in our winter seminars. So thanks for taking the time.
No problem.
It's that time of year when you need to step back and realize all the things that we need to be thankful for. Now, no doubt this year had its challenges and at times concerns, but in the end, the good Lord took care of us. We here at Crop Tech are very grateful to all the people who helped make 2022 another record year for us. We are very thankful for all the new customers who have joined the Crop Tech family, helping us to grow our business, as well as a big thank you to all the loyal existing Crop Tech customers. That loyalty is very much appreciated. It overwhelms me when I stop to think about the fact that a lot of our customers now, we're dealing with the second and the third generation of farmers. We do not take that loyalty for granted, and we'll continue to do our best to continue to earn that loyalty. We're also thankful for all the people who have supported our virtual and live events here at Hayworth and across the country in Canada. It's such a joy to meet and work with all these great people. I would also like to thank all of the farmers and industry people who help us with the Farm Journal Plot program. It is through your contribution of time and expertise and product that makes the plot program work. We recognize your great effort, and it is truly appreciated. Don't forget, next week, our virtual Beyond the Basics series kicks off on Tuesday, November 29th. The annual Hand Harvest Day is here Wednesday, the 30th, right here at the Crop Tech facility. Our virtual Winter College kicks off January 5th. We here at Crop Tech wish everyone a safe and happy Thanksgiving. To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.